What's going on, guys? It's Henry, and today I want to talk about GEVO stock because this is a stock that I covered previously, and I want to reiterate that this is a stock that I'm very bullish on. And recently, because of the Suez Canal situation, with oil, kind of spiking and then oil falling back down, it got me to thinking about stocks that may potentially benefit, maybe not now, but in the future with this whole energy craze. And this made me realize that GEVO is at about $8 per share right now. And when I take a look at it, which I'm going to show you guys in a quick second, that basically this is a Biden play, and Biden's going to be propping up the whole entire energy sector because a lot of laws and policies that are going to be coming out are going to be very green friendly. And GEVO is a stock that's going to be tremendously benefiting from this type of trend. All right, let's take a look at my screen right here. So the stock is hovering around $8.10. Currently, it is sitting actually below the 50-day moving average. And it's pretty surprising to me because recently this stock was as high as $14.61 per share. It was trying to go up towards the $15 mark, but it had a sell-off and we hit a low right here. And this was a complete bottom for GEVO. This was a fantastic time to get into the stock. I was telling a lot of people over on the Patreon that I'm selling puts on GEVO because it's a fantastic entry price, but also covered calls were very profitable here because you were essentially buying the stock for around $7 and you were selling the $7.50 contract. So you were collecting premium. And if you look over here, $7, $6.98, these were two closing prices for GEVO, but they were not able to sustain that low level since investors realized that, hey, GEVO is a stock that I want to get into. So recently we've seen it pull back up to about $10 per share, which is where I think GEVO should sit at least in the short term before it skyrockets higher, given the Biden policies, given the contracts that they have with Delta, which I'm going to be discussing very soon. Right now, the stock is just kind of, it has a little short term. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to scroll over. It had a little dip here at $8.16, and it looks like we're going to be holding. Let me actually draw a pattern right here. Looks like we're going to be holding around this key level right here. I mean, we were bouncing off this level. Boom. For me, taking a look right here, I mean, we have strong support around 8.5 and then $8 per share. We have support for the short term for GEVO. And if we see some upside, we're going to have a little bit of resistance here at around $10 per share. So I basically see the stock bouncing back and forth between $8 and $10 in the short term. Now, if we do take a look at a couple things that I really want to go over because they have a renewed slide deck for March 2021. This is specifically what I really wanted to talk about because, they go over a lot of different details. I'm going to scroll into here. Of course, you guys probably already know. The CEO is phenomenal. You guys probably already know. So Patrick Gruber's LinkedIn right here, which I pulled up, what I really enjoy is that he has a PhD in chemistry. He has a BA in chemistry, but he also has an MBA from the University of Minnesota. So this man, he's a businessman. He has a chemistry background. And basically because GEVO is producing biofuel, you really do need a chemistry degree to understand how ethanol is made, how these different compounds are made, and how different microorganisms can create bacteria that can create different types of biofuel. So essentially going back here, Patrick Gruber is amazing. And if you take a look at what they do, again, guys, they're creating hydrocarbon fuels. They're creating ways that we can use energy in a more green fashion. So rather than burning oil, which, obviously we all know that oil is going to be going away. We have Tesla, we have other companies that are focusing on creating a more green future. I think GEVO is the stock that's building a lot of infrastructure. They're growing their contracts and they have some key relationships, which are going to be flourishing in the future. And for me, this is a long-term stock. So if you look here, obviously renewable natural gas, renewable electricity, they're creating these type of things. And if I keep going here, basically the way they do it, they have a lot of different technologies, and I'm not an expert on chemistry or green technology per se, but what they have is they engineer and they implement 260 different changes to yeast. So yeast is a common bacteria. It's actually what makes bread rise. Yeast is a very interesting microorganism because basically they devour different bacteria, and as a byproduct, they create certain gases. And what happens here is this type of yeast or different types of yeast create fermentation, and that's actually what creates the biofuel. So GEVO actually has 595 different patents and applications for their technologies that they've already developed. And for me, that's very strong. And specifically, it's worth about $400 million in terms of valuable intellectual property. That's what IP stands for. Now, another thing that I really like is that they have high barriers to entry. So creating a business that turns waste into biofuel, that's not very easy because there's a lot of costs associated with running a business like that, not only do they need the equipment and facilities to create that fermentation process, but also there's a lot of scientists that have to go behind this. There's a lot of patents, there's different costs associated with developing technologies. So this company is already ahead of the curve. And as I'm about to get into, they have some key contracts that they've already made. And specifically, I'm going to tell you guys why I'm so bullish on the contracts that they have in place. It's something called take or pay, which I'm going to get to in a second. So if we continue with the slide, basically, so GEVO really has that whole renewable carbon system going on here. So if you take a look, they have sustainably grown raw materials that, might it be corn, it might be manure from cows or chickens or pigs. And all of this goes into the biogas plant. So all of these different wastes that are not really useful will go into the biogas plant, and with their proprietary technology, the microbes, the yeast, that yeast ends up eating those different waste materials and creating the biogas fuels that are then sold to companies like Delta. So if you take a look here, some selected customers and partners that GEVO already has is Delta, but also Lufthansa and Virgin Australia, amongst others. So airlines are a really big opportunity, and Delta already has an agreement with GEVO for 10 million gallons of fuel for 10 years. So essentially, that's going to be 100 million gallons supplied by GEVO to Delta. And that type of contract for me, and that's what makes me bullish on GEVO, because as you guys know, there has not been a whole lot of demand for flying or travel because countries have been closed. But as the vaccine rolls out, I suspect that a lot of people will have a lot of pent-up demand for traveling, checking things out, having some fun, going on some cruises, which is why I made a video on CCL as well, like Carnival Cruise. But Delta Airlines, American Airlines, all of these airlines, they're going to need a whole lot of gas, because in the future, people are going to want to travel a lot just like they were before the whole pandemic. And the opportunity for GEVO to supply the airlines with the fuel that they need is going to be a huge way that GEVO can generate a lot of revenues. And the next thing I want to talk about is the enormous total addressable market, because essentially, even within finance, when you have hedge funds or you have private equity shops or venture capitalists, when they look at companies that they are going to be investing money in, whether it's an early stage company or a company that has already went through some funding, maybe an A round or a B round series of funding, these investors, what they actually look for is a total addressable market. So the way they actually make money is they spread around the money, they spread around their capital into different investments, and they hope that one of those investments becomes the next Uber, the next Lyft, or the next unicorn company that will IPO, like maybe an Airbnb, something like that. And that's what those investors are looking for. So total addressable market is one of the most important factors for being a long-term investor, because over the next 5 to 10 years, you obviously want the stock to have a potential to 10x, 20x, maybe even 50x over time. And the only way that really happens is if the company has a large total addressable market, and if it captures a piece of that total addressable market, then it ends up making a lot of profits and taking some share. And obviously as an investor, you get very rewarded. So the total addressable market for GEVO is actually 888 billion gallons per year. And I just told you guys that basically they're gonna be supplying Delta with 10 million gallons. As you guys can see, that is a small, and I mean very, very small portion of the total volume that they could be supplying if maybe more airlines came on board, if other companies came on board. Maybe there's different tractor companies or different construction companies, or whatever it may be. There is a lot of demand for fuel and energy across multiple different sectors. Of course, airlines could be the major sector that GEVO would benefit most from. Now, if also 80% of the EVs actually end up happening, and we know that that's going to be the case because there's so many countries that have laws that EVs are going to be necessary by 2030, 2035, and even maybe the slowest countries, I don't know exactly which countries are the slowest to adopt, but they certainly plan to be zero net neutrality by 2050. And a lot of companies, a lot of countries, they're going to be adopting different policies that are going to be leaning towards green energy, and electric vehicles are going to be contributing to the potential addressable market for green companies like GEVO. Now, something I want to address with you guys, because this is something that I recently learned about GEVO, is that they actually have a pay structure that really benefits the company. And specifically, it's called take or pay right here. So if you look at the screen, take or pay, what it means is basically the supplier, which is GEVO, has a relationship with the buyer, and they have a contract in place which says, hey, you're either going to be taking this contract that we have, which is say, hey, 10 million gallons of fuel for Delta, Or if you decide to back out, since we have so much cost associated with, providing this type of contract for you to begin with, because obviously they have to have some inventory, they have to go along with the process of creating this biofuel for that company. They actually say that if you go back on your word, we still have a guaranteed payout, which means you take it or you pay part of it anyways. So the companies never usually have a reason to back out of the contract. And even if they do back out, they usually end up paying a significant amount of fees. So GEVO will just be able to recoup all the time and money that they spent creating the fuel for the company that they were going to supply anyways. So this actually makes me really bullish because they already have a lot of contracts in place. And as you guys can see, they have 1.5 billion take or pay offtake already signed with a few companies like Delta, SAS, all of these companies for jet fuel, and they also have some contracts signed for gasoline. Now they also have $6 billion. I mean, the market cap for GEVO, if you take a look, let's go to summary real fast. The market cap for GEVO is 1.6 billion, but they have 6 billion in contracts that they're already talking about or negotiating. They're not signed contracts yet. However, they have negotiations with really reputable companies that they think they may potentially sign. And for me, that's a really big deal because they have a long pipeline of companies that might be paying them significant revenues in the near future. Again, who knows, is that actually gonna come to fruition or not? I mean, who knows, but even if they took maybe 10% of 6 billion, that would be $600 million. And if you add that to the 1.5 billion take or pay that they already have signed, that's going to be $2.1 billion. And the market cap is $1.6 billion. So even if they had a price to sales ratio of 1, this company is at least a $2 billion company. So it's at least a $10 stock for me. But also if you take a look at this $6 billion and they end up closing maybe 20% or 30%, that's going to be between $1.2 billion or $1.8 billion. And when you add that to the 1.5, I mean, this stock can absolutely double from these levels because it can have revenue of potentially billions of dollars. And if you take the potential of having multiple $1 billion of revenue and you put a reasonable price to earnings ratio of maybe like 10, if you put 10 price to earnings and they have revenue of $1 billion, well, they're gonna be a $10 billion company. So a $10 billion valuation would be about a 6x from the current stock price or about $48 per share. Now, of course, that's gonna take some time, but at $48 per share, or I'll just say $50 per share, GEVO is going to be an incredible investment, even if it takes 4 or 5 years to come to fruition. Now, something that I really like about the company is that they have no material debt outstanding. And for me, that's very important because companies that are saddled with a lot of debt end up coming up, usually will have a tremendous amount of more risk because they have bondholders to pay. And also they just have interest to pay on the debt. And if a company has a slow year or two, then they end up having to be in a tough position paying off debt and not being able to really use the money that they have taken out anyways. That was my thoughts on GEVO. This is a stock that I think can be a $10 stock in the very short term and a $50 stock in the longer term. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.